I told my daughter I needed to move into assisted living on a Thursday evening in October. Not with a shaking voice, not with any performance of frailty, because I have never been a man who performs things. I told her the way you report a decision that has already been made, sitting in my recliner with the television off and the porch light on outside, because I knew she'd be parking in the dark. I said, "Marissa, my knees are done. The doctor says another winter alone in this house is a fall waiting to happen. I've been looking at Brightwood Commons. I think it's time." I watched her face, and my daughter, my 41-year-old daughter who I had carried on my shoulders through the Ohio State Fair more times than either of us could count, who had learned to drive in the church parking lot 2 blocks from where we sat, said 4 words before she had the sense to stop herself. She said, "So the house sells." Not, "Dad, are you okay?" Not, "What do you need from me?" The house sells. Like I had just confirmed something she'd already priced out. Then she caught herself. She rearranged her face into something meant to look like concern. She said she only meant that practically, of course, someone would need to think about the house eventually, that she was just processing out loud, that what mattered was me and my knees and my safety. She talked for almost 5 minutes in that careful backpedaling register people use when they've said the true thing before the polite thing had a chance to get there first. But I'd heard it. 4 words, clean and unrehearsed. The sound of someone who had been waiting on a particular door to open and had just heard the hinge move. So, the house sells. I did not have bad knees that required assisted living. My knees are the same knees I've had for a decade, aching some mornings the way 64-year-old knees do, nothing more. I was not moving anywhere. I had made the whole thing up, every word of it, because for months something had been gathering at the edges of what I noticed about my daughter, and I needed to know, cleanly and without any doubt I could later talk myself out of, whether what I suspected was true. And in one sentence, before her mind caught up to her mouth, she told me, "I thought that was the worst of it. I thought the test was over and I had my answer and now I just had to decide what to do with it. I was wrong." What I overheard 3 days later, standing in my own garage with the door half open, was so much worse than 4 careless words that I still have trouble putting it into a straight sentence, even now, even after everything that came after. Hey there, family. If you're new here, welcome. And if you've been with me a while, you already know what kind of stories we tell. Drop a comment and tell me what town you're listening from tonight. Hit that like button, and let's get into this one, because it's a long one, and it's true. My name is Walter Kessler. I'm 64 years old, and I live in a split-level house on Meridian Court in a town called Fairborn, Ohio, just outside Dayton. I've owned this house since 1988, 36 years. Long enough that I've replaced the roof twice and the water heater 3 times and watched 3 different families move in and out of the place across the street. I spent 31 years working as a machinist, and then a shop foreman at a precision tooling company called Vantage Industrial, the kind of work where you learn early that 1/10 of a millimeter is the difference between a part that works and a part that gets rejected at final inspection. And that discipline follows you home, whether you want it to or not. I retired 4 years ago with a pension, a 401k I never touched during the bad years even when it would have been easier to, and a paid-off house. My wife Sandra passed 6 years ago. Ovarian cancer, caught late the way it usually is, gone in 8 months, from the day of the diagnosis to the day I sat alone in a hospital room holding a hand that had stopped holding mine back. Sandra ran our household finances for 34 years the way I ran the shop floor, with a ledger and a system and zero patience for guessing. After she died, I kept the same system going because it was the last thing of hers. I still had my hands in every week, and because letting it go felt like one more way of losing her. I have 2 daughters. Marissa is the older one, 41, lives in Beaver Creek, 15 minutes from me. Works as a regional sales manager for a medical supply company, a job that rewards exactly the kind of person she's always been. Quick to read a room, quicker to see what someone wants before they've said it out loud, and quickest of all to figure out how to be the one who provides it, for a price she rarely mentions up front. She has her mother's laugh, which is the cruelest thing about all of this, because that laugh has made it hard for me to look at her clearly for longer than I should have let it. My younger daughter, Chloe, is 36, lives in Columbus, an hour and a half north, works as a physical therapist at a rehab hospital, and calls me every Sunday afternoon at 4 o'clock without fail, a habit she started the month after her mother's funeral and has not broken once in 6 years, not even the Sunday her second daughter was born. When she called from a hospital bed at 4:05 to apologize for being 5 minutes late, Chloe apologizing for being late while she was still hooked up to a monitor tells you most of what you need to know about Chloe. She did not know about the test. Nobody knew about the test except me. Not my accountant, not the man who cuts my grass, not my brother Ray, who I eventually told everything, but only after it was already finished. I built it alone, over the back half of the summer, because something had been accumulating in the quiet part of my mind for long enough that I needed proof before I did anything at all in response to it. What I'd noticed had started small, the way these things always do. A comment Marissa made at a cookout in July about how this house was a lot of square footage to heat for one person. A question, phrased casually, about whether Sandra's old life insurance payout had ever been fully settled, and whether I'd rolled it into something or just left it sitting. A remark, tossed off like an afterthought, about how property values on Meridian Court had climbed faster than anyone expected, and had I thought about what that meant long term, and then a comment from Chloe, mentioned without any suspicion in her voice at all, that Marissa had called her the month before to talk about Dad's situation. Just checking in, just making sure they were on the same page about things. Chloe hadn't found that strange. Chloe rarely found anything Marissa did strange, because Chloe had spent her whole life extending her older sister, a kind of automatic good faith that Marissa had been drawing against for years, without ever making a deposit. I found it strange. I found the pattern of small financial questions strange in the specific way a man who spent 31 years catching tenth of a millimeter errors on a factory floor finds patterns strange, which is to say I noticed it before I could have named it, and once I named it, I couldn't unnotice it again. So I built the test. I sat down myself and drafted a letter, on my own, no lawyer involved yet, addressed to myself, that laid out a plausible decline. Not dramatic, not a man in crisis, just a quiet story about knees that had gotten worse than they actually were, and a decision that a man my age might reasonably arrive at on his own. I wrote it out longhand first so I'd have the details straight in my head. The name of a fictional doctor, a fictional fall I'd supposedly had in the garage that scared me more than I let on, a fictional conversation with that fictional doctor about mobility and stairs and how a split-level house full of them wasn't the kind of place a man should be living alone much longer. I called Marissa on a Tuesday and asked if she could come by Thursday evening, just to talk. Nothing urgent, I said, though I said it in a tone I knew would make it sound urgent anyway, because I wanted to see how fast she'd move. She was at my door by 6:15, 10 minutes early, which Marissa always managed to be whenever she suspected something might be happening. We sat in the living room. I told her about the knees, the garage, the doctor, Brightwood Commons, and I watched her say those 4 words before her face had time to catch up to her mouth. So the house sells. Then 5 minutes of walking it back. Then almost an hour of her being warm and helpful and full of practical suggestions, saying she'd start looking into senior communities for me, saying not to rush into anything, saying she had a coworker whose mother had gone through this exact thing and could maybe recommend a good realtor when the time came. She said when the time came, the way a person says something they've already scheduled. I thanked her for coming. I told her I loved her. I walked her to her car. I stood in the driveway after her taillights turned onto Kingsview Drive, and I went back inside and sat in the dark kitchen for a long time before I finally went to bed. I want you to sit with me in the 3 days between that Thursday and the following Sunday, because that gap is where this story stopped being about 4 careless words and became something I genuinely did not expect to be carrying. Even after I'd already heard the worst sentence I thought a daughter could say to her father, I'd believed, Thursday night, that the test was finished. I'd believed what I needed to know was whether the mask would slip when the news landed, and it had slipped, and I thought that was the whole shape of the thing. I was wrong about the shape. Sunday morning showed me the rest of it. If you're still with me, drop a comment and tell me where you're listening from, because what I heard in my own garage 3 days later is the real reason I'm telling you this story tonight. I've always been an early riser, the residual habit of 31 years clocking in before the sun was fully up. Retirement never touched that particular wiring. I'm awake by 5:30 most mornings regardless of what the night before looked like, and by 6 I'm usually out in the garage, which I use as a workshop, tinkering with something or other, because sitting still that early in the morning has never once agreed with me. That Sunday I was out there by 6, working on an old radio I'd been restoring, the garage door half raised the way I always leave it for airflow, when I heard a car pull into my driveway. Marissa's car. Which struck me as strange, because it wasn't a day she usually came by, and it was not yet 7 in the morning. I stayed where I was, behind the workbench, mostly hidden by the shelving unit I'd built along the sidewall, and I watched her get out of her car and walk to the far end of the driveway, near the sidewalk, phone already up to her ear, clearly under the impression that no one in the house was awake yet to hear her. I heard her say good morning to whoever picked up, in that clipped, business-like voice she uses with people she isn't bothering to charm. And then I heard the conversation I have replayed in my head more times than I can count since. She said, "So he's serious about the move. He told me Thursday. It's basically decided." A pause. I know. Listen, before he gets some agent involved who doesn't know the neighborhood, I want us positioned. Meridian Court, that lot, corner lot, no less. In this market, that's 420, maybe 440, if we stage it right. Another pause. He is not going to know the difference, Trent. He hasn't looked at a real estate listing in 20 years. If we come in around 340, present it like a fair cash offer from a family friend who wants to avoid a bidding war and a long closing, he signs, and we flip it in 4 months for an $80,000–$90,000 spread. Easy. I stood very still behind that shelving unit with a half-disassembled radio in my hands, and I did not move. She kept going. The insurance money. I'm still working an angle on that. I need to know exactly what Mom's policy paid out and where it landed, because I don't think he's touched most of it. And if he needs help managing that once he's in assisted living, which he will, I want to be the one he calls first. Another pause. Longer this time. Then, quieter, though the garage carries sound in a specific way I know better than almost anyone alive, she said, "Chloe's not going to be a problem. She trusts me. She's always trusted me. I'll handle Chloe. My younger daughter. The one who calls every Sunday at 4. The one who apologized for being 5 minutes late from a hospital bed. I'll handle Chloe." I stood in my own garage holding a radio chassis, and I felt something in the center of my chest go very quiet. The particular quiet that happens when a shape you'd only suspected finally solidifies into something with edges and a name. The name wasn't a legal term. It was a simpler word. Betrayal. Not the dramatic kind. Not a villain in a movie. But the plain, domestic kind, where a person who is supposed to love you has been looking at you for longer than you want to admit, primarily as an asset that hasn't been unlocked yet. I set the radio down very carefully so it wouldn't make a sound, and I waited behind that shelving unit until I heard her car pull back out of the driveway, and only then did I go inside and sit down at my kitchen table and put my head in my hands for a while. I did not call Marissa that day. I called Chloe. It was not our Sunday 4 o'clock. It was closer to 9 in the morning, and she picked up on the second ring, already sounding alert in the way people do when a call at an odd hour makes them brace before they even say hello. She said, "Dad, what's wrong?" I told her everything, in order. The fake decline, the false story about the knees in Brightwood Commons, the 4 words Marissa had said before she could stop herself, and then the phone call from the driveway I'd overheard that very morning. Every part of it, the number, the plan, the flip, and the last part. The part about her. Chloe was quiet for a long time after I finished. The specific kind of quiet a person goes into when they're rebuilding, piece by piece, their understanding of someone they've trusted their entire life. She said she'd handle me. Chloe finally said, "Yes," I said. Another silence. "Dad," she said, "how much is actually in Mom's policy? What did it actually pay out?" I told her the real number. The line went quiet again, and I could hear her breathing change. The particular exhale of someone doing math in their head and landing somewhere much larger than they'd been led to expect by a sister who'd been managing what she was allowed to know. "She told me 8 months ago you were barely getting by," Chloe said. "She said the insurance company had lowballed the payout and you were stretched thin and worried about the house taxes." "She told you that 8 months ago?" I said. Yes. 8 months ago, Marissa had already been laying groundwork with Chloe, the same patient construction she'd been running on me through every small financial question over the past year. 2 separate narratives calibrated to land in the same place. A father who believed he had less than he had, and a sister who believed the same thing, so that when the moment came, neither of them would think to ask an outside question about the number Marissa arrived with. Chloe asked what I needed from her. I said I needed her to keep this between us for now, and I needed the name of a good estate attorney if she knew one in Dayton. She did. Of course she did. Because Chloe has always been the kind of person who keeps useful names filed away long before she has any reason to expect she'll need them. The attorney was a woman named Deborah Ashworth, an office on Main Street in downtown Dayton, who specialized, according to Chloe, in exactly this category of situation, where an aging parent's estate intersects with a family member who has decided they are entitled to a position they were never actually given. I called Deborah Ashworth that same afternoon. She let me talk without interrupting once, and when I finished, she asked me a single question. Mr. Kessler, do you have documentation of your actual financial picture? The real numbers? I told her I did. That I'd kept my own ledger going since my wife died, and my accountant had every year of it on file. Good, she said. And the conversation in the driveway? Did you record it? I hadn't thought to. I told her that. She was quiet a moment. That's all right. The comment about the house from Thursday, combined with the content of that phone call and your documented actual finances, gives us a strong enough picture even without a recording. Here's what I want to do. I want to build a complete, accurate, notarized asset picture, filed properly, so there is no version of events where the real numbers can be disputed later. She paused. And I want to revise your estate documents before your daughter takes another step, because from what you've described, she's operating on a timeline. I asked how soon she could see me. Tomorrow morning, she said. 8 o'clock. I was there at 7:40. Deborah Ashworth in person was exactly what her phone voice promised. Unhurried, precise, the specific calm of a woman who has walked 100 families through exactly this kind of morning and knows precisely where each step goes without needing to rush any of it. She had a legal pad and a fountain pen, and she wrote in small, tight handwriting that filled the page efficiently while I told her everything again, start to finish. When I was done, she started a list. My complete financial documentation, the actual life insurance payout records, my current will, and a written, dated, signed account of both the Thursday conversation and the Sunday morning phone call, as close to word for word as I could manage. I asked how much weight a written account carries without an actual recording. Combined with everything else, considerable weight, she said. You are not filing any kind of criminal complaint here, Mr. Kessler, not at this point. You are documenting your actual financial reality and revising your estate to reflect your actual intentions. The overheard conversation is supporting context. It is not the foundation. The foundation is the numbers themselves. And the numbers, once she had them in front of her, were substantial. 31 years at Vantage Industrial had left me with a pension paying out steadily, a 401k that had quietly grown to just over $600,000 because I never once touched it. Not during the '08 crash, not during the lean years right after Sandra's diagnosis when the medical bills piled up faster than either of us wanted to talk about. Sandra's life insurance policy, the one Marissa had told her sister was barely anything, had paid out $410,000, almost none of which I had spent, because spending it had always felt like something I wasn't ready to do. The house on Meridian Court, appraised that same week at Deborah's request, came in at $435,000, corner lot and all. Total picture, just under $1.5 million in assets, held by a man his own daughter believed was so strapped he'd need to be managed into a modest cash sale of his home for $340,000 to a family friend. I want you to sit with that gap for a second. $340 offered as a fair price on a house Marissa herself had said, on the phone, was worth $420 to $440. A gap of at least $80,000, minimum, in her favor, on a deal she was positioning herself to broker by being the first person in the door with a number, before a supposedly declining, trusting father thought to get an outside opinion of his own. Deborah revised the estate documents over the following 4 days, and I want to tell you plainly what changed and what didn't, because both halves matter to me. What didn't change was Chloe's position. She'd earned her place in that will honestly over 36 years, and nothing I'd learned that week changed one thing about the truth of my relationship with my younger daughter. What changed was Marissa's position, not erased, because I am not in the business of erasing my own child, but restructured to something specific and documented, a sum that accounted honestly for what I'd already given her across her adult life, 2 down payments on cars, a chunk toward her wedding, a bridge loan when her first business venture folded that she never once mentioned repaying, weighed against what she'd been quietly positioning herself to take. The house itself went into a trust, with Deborah as independent trustee, unable to be sold without her written approval, and a fresh independent appraisal within 60 days of any offer, and with an explicit clause that no family member could serve as buyer, agent, or broker on any transaction involving that property, ever. Chloe was named co-trustee. I called her the evening the papers were signed and told her. She went quiet for a moment and then said, "Dad, you didn't have to make me co-trustee." "I know," I said. "That's exactly why it matters." She laughed, small and real. The kind of laugh that comes out when someone recognizes a sentiment they've heard before in a different shape. The documents were signed, notarized, and filed on a Friday, 11 days after the Thursday I'd told my daughter I needed to sell the house, and she'd said 4 words before she could stop herself. On Saturday morning, I called Marissa. "If you're still here with me, drop a comment and tell me what you'd have said in that phone call, and hit that like button, because how I finally told her is the part of this whole thing I spent the longest time getting right." She picked up on the first ring, the way she'd been picking up all week, which told me she was watching her phone more closely than she usually let on. "Dad," she said, warm, immediate. "I've been thinking about you all week. How are the knees?" "I'm doing fine," I said. "I wanted to talk through some things. Can you come by this afternoon?" "Of course," she said. "What time?" I said 3. She was there at 2:50. She came in wearing the same practiced warmth she'd been wearing since Thursday, the warmth of a person who believes she's managing a situation that's moving her direction. She sat down at my kitchen table. I poured 2 cups of coffee and set one in front of her and sat down across from her. And then I said, "Marissa, I want to tell you something true before I tell you the rest of it. I love you. That's true no matter what I say next, and I need you to hear that part first, so everything after it lands the right way." She looked at me. Something shifted, small and involuntary, across her face, the first flicker of understanding that this wasn't the conversation she'd walked in expecting. "I don't have bad knees," I said. "There was no fall in the garage. I'm not moving to Brightwood Commons or anywhere else. And the house is not being sold, not by you, not through anyone you know." Silence. "I told you I was moving out because I needed to know something," I said. "And you told me, before you had a chance to manage it." 4 words, Marissa, and they said everything I needed to hear. She put both hands flat on the table. She didn't say anything. "And Sunday morning," I said. "When you stood at the end of my driveway on the phone with Trent, the garage door was up. I was right there behind the shelving unit. I've lived in that garage longer than you've been alive, Marissa. I know exactly how far sound carries in there." Her face went a specific kind of pale, the color of someone rapidly reconstructing an entire recent stretch of their own life and realizing the reconstruction isn't landing anywhere good. "Dad," she said, "the house really is worth over $400,000. I have an independent appraisal from this week," I said. "You were going to offer me $340 as a fair cash price from a friend avoiding a bidding war. I know the number because you said it yourself, standing in my driveway, while I was 30 feet away, holding a radio." She didn't try to deny it. "I'll give her that much." She sat there looking at her coffee and did not try to build a version of events where what I just described hadn't happened, and something in that told me there was still a person underneath the calculation who knew, at least, when the calculating had run its course. "The estate's been revised and filed," I said. "Deborah Ashworth on Main Street handled it. The house is in a trust with an independent trustee, and the terms make what you had planned impossible, permanently." I paused. "Chloe is co-trustee." Marissa closed her eyes for a second. "Did you tell Chloe about the phone call?" "I told Chloe everything," I said, "including the part where you said you'd handle her." She opened her eyes and looked at the table for a long time. "Marissa," I said, "I'm going to tell you what I told your sister when she asked what I needed from her. I need the truth, the real one, not a managed version. What's actually going on with you and Trent financially? Because I think what I heard in that driveway is a woman who's in over her head somewhere and has started looking at her father as a solution instead of someone she can ask for help. And those are 2 very different things, and one of them I can work with, and one of them I genuinely cannot." She looked up at me. "Are you in trouble?" I asked. A long pause, the kind with real weight sitting inside it. "Yes," she said. "Tell me," I said, and she did, not all of it at once, the way truth comes out of someone who's been holding it compressed for a long time, in fits and starts, losing the thread and finding it again. Trent, her boyfriend of 2 years, had convinced her to co-sign on a commercial property investment 18 months earlier that had gone bad fast when a tenant defaulted and the balloon payment came due anyway. A second, riskier loan had gone toward covering the first, and that one hadn't resolved either. She'd personally guaranteed both, which meant the exposure wasn't just financial on paper, it was hers, directly, in a way that could reach her house, her savings, her paycheck. She wasn't destitute, but she was close enough to understand exactly what destitute would feel like, and the gap between where she stood and where she needed to be had made my house look, to her, like a bridge she was entitled to walk across. I listened to the whole thing without interrupting. When she finished, I sat with it a moment. "You should have called me," I said. She looked at the table. "Not to take something from me?" I said. "To ask me? There's a version of this where you called me a year ago and said, 'Dad, I'm in over my head and I need help,' and we'd have had a very different year than the one we just had." I paused. "I don't know if I'd have helped the way you wanted. I want to be honest with you about that. What you were planning, the house, the number, the position, that told me something about your judgment I'm still sitting with. But I would have listened. We'd have had the conversation." Marissa put her hand over her eyes and sat like that for a while. "Dad," she finally said, "I'm sorry." I looked at my daughter, 41 years old, with her mother's laugh and a bad investment and a worse plan, and the specific exhaustion of someone who's been running two separate stories for too long and has finally run out of road to keep running them on. "I know you are," I said. "The will," she said. "What you changed. It's accurate," I said. "It reflects the relationship as it actually is right now. If that relationship changes over the coming years, I'll revisit it, because I'm not trying to punish you. I'm trying to be accurate. But accuracy starts today, with the truth. And the truth is that what you were building toward wasn't the act of a daughter who trusts her father." She nodded slowly. "Where do I start?" she said. "With your own attorney," I said. "Tomorrow, before anything else. And you tell them the whole picture, not the version you've been managing." She nodded again. "And then you call your sister," I said. "Not me calling her to tell her what you said. You call her." Marissa looked at the table for a long moment, then said, "She's going to be furious." "Yes," I said. "She's going to be furious, and then she's going to listen, because Chloe has always been better at both of those things than either of us gave her credit for." Marissa left a little after 5. I stood at my kitchen window and watched her car pull out of the driveway and turn onto Kingsview Drive, and then I stood there a while longer, looking at the yard, at the maple tree near the fence line that Sandra had planted the same spring we bought the house, enormous now in the way trees get enormous when you stop noticing them growing. I called Chloe. She picked up on the second ring. I told her Marissa would be calling. Chloe was quiet a moment, then asked, "How did she look when she left?" "Like someone who set something down that had gotten very heavy," I said, "and isn't sure yet what to do with her hands now that they're empty." Chloe made a sound somewhere between a sigh and a laugh. "That sounds exactly like her," she said. "Yes," I said. "It does." We talked for almost half an hour about other things. About her older girl starting kindergarten in the fall. About a new rotation at the rehab hospital she was excited about. About the maple tree, which she hadn't seen since spring, and which I described as finally getting too big for its own good. The specific, wonderful way trees do when nobody's paying close enough attention. When we hung up, I went out to the back patio and sat in the chair Sandra used to sit in on summer evenings, and I looked at the yard and the fence and the maple, and I just breathed for a while. The house was still mine. The documents were accurate. The number Marissa had planned to offer would never appear on any real closing sheet, because the trust made that conversation permanently moot. And somewhere in Beaver Creek, my older daughter was sitting with the weight of whatever she'd just set down, working out what came next. I didn't know what came next for her. That part was hers to work through, with her own attorney, with Chloe, with the actual shape of her own finances, once the managed version had finally been put away for good. I'd made clear what I could live with and what I couldn't. The rest belonged to her. What I understood, sitting on that patio, was that the test had cost me more than I'd expected, not in dollars, but in the particular, expensive way that clarity always costs more than not knowing, because not knowing lets you keep the version of a person you'd prefer to believe in, and clarity forces you to live with the version that's actually true. Marissa had failed the test I'd built, and then, at my kitchen table on a Saturday afternoon, she'd done something the test was never designed to measure. She told the truth when the truth was the only thing left to offer, without negotiating it down or dressing it up into something easier to carry. That wasn't nothing. It wasn't forgiveness either. But it wasn't nothing. I went back inside. I watered Sandra's African violets on the windowsill, the ones I've kept alive for 6 years, mostly out of stubbornness. I made myself dinner and sat at the table to eat it, which I don't always bother doing when it's just me. And I thought, for a long while, about a woman who ran our household books for 34 years with a precision I never came close to matching, and who probably would have seen straight through all of this months before I did, straight through the small questions and the careful concern, right to whatever was sitting underneath it. She'd have handled it differently than I did, I think. Less of the long, careful architecture, more of a direct conversation, earlier, before it ever needed a lawyer or a trust, or a Saturday afternoon at a kitchen table. She'd probably have been right to do it that way. But she wasn't here to do it her way. And I did it the way I knew how, which was to build something solid, make sure it would hold, and get the results down on paper, where nobody could argue with them later. The results are on paper now, the structure held. For tonight, that's enough. If this one stayed with you, drop a comment and tell me which moment changed the room for you, the 4 words in the living room or the phone call in the driveway. Hit that like button, subscribe if this is your first time finding us, and I'll see you in the next one. And if you've ever wondered what's actually sitting underneath the sudden warmth of someone who's started asking a few too many questions about what you've got and what you're planning to do with it, I'll tell you what a machinist from Fairborn, Ohio learned in his own garage on a Sunday morning. You don't need a recording. You just need to give someone the wrong opening, and enough conviction that they think no one's listening. The truth has a way of answering the question before it's even been asked out loud. True family stories, every week, right here. Subscribe, hit the bell, and I'll talk to you soon.